So I'm going to start out with some remarks sort of trying to lay out where we are so far with the definition for the National Digital Platform, how it's developing, a bit about some of the awards that we've made, and then invite each of the panelists to respond and sort of give perspectives from different points of view on how this is developing. And then over the course of the day, we'll have a series of panels where moderators have similar groups to discuss issues. So I'll take about 5 minutes here to get into this, this concept. So consider the following diverse scenarios. A librarian in Utah develops and shares a plugin for an open source repository system that's reused in libraries in 3 other states. A curator in New York develops or improves documentation for open source exhibition software used by staff at museums and libraries around the country. A network of libraries bands together to develop a common system that makes it easier for other libraries to provide access to ebooks. And a nonprofit organization develops and runs a series of workshops to equip librarians around the country to install, deploy, and configure open source tools to acquire, preserve, and provide access to digital objects. In each of these cases, staff are working to solve local needs for their institutions, communities, but at the same time, they're also contributing directly to regional and national efforts. The work at each of these organizations is making use of and contributing to the National Digital Platform for Libraries and Museums. So again, thank you to everyone who's joined us, both those in the room and watching via the webcast, for joining us and helping us to better understand how to catalyze the shared work that we can engage in to improve digital capacity and capability for libraries across the country. So I'm happy to invite Brett from the National Endowment for the Humanities, Amy Garmer from the Aspen Institute Dialogue on Public Libraries, and Jim Neal from Columbia to respond and comment on this definition once I've sort of put it together here. So again, catalyze improvements in digital capacity. So focus for us is a key word. That's sort of one of the key terms of this whole series of meetings. And we're thrilled to have you here to help us train the focus of our agency on building this capacity to provide every library user in the country with improved access to content, collections, and services. So when we get to the National Digital Platform, we've got a couple layers that I'll discuss. On a very broad level, we're talking about a way of thinking about what accumulates from all the digital tools, services, infrastructure, and skills libraries and librarians need to utilize to meet the needs of their users across the country. More specifically, it's a priority area in our grant program. So again, broadly, it's this way of thinking about the nation, all of the software applications, the social, technical infrastructure, the staff expertise that provides every library content and services to all users in the United States. And so in this vein, the platform isn't an individual thing. It's not a piece of software. It's not a website. It's the culmination of those things. It's what they become altogether. And so if we're to zoom out and sort of look at all of these software tools, the components, the infrastructure, the knowledge required to use and contribute to that, and you sort of squint a little bit, you can start to see what that national platform is. And so as we increasingly use digital infrastructure to provide access to content, there are more and more opportunities for collaboration around the tools and services we use to meet users' needs. So it's possible in this case for every library in the country to leverage and benefit from the work of other libraries in shared digital services, systems, and infrastructure. So from this perspective, the foundations of a national digital platform for libraries and museums already exist in a range of open source software projects and shared services provided by local, regional, and national organizations. And as Maura had noted, over the past 20 years, we've conducted an enormous amount of research and development around digital libraries. But much of that has been locally focused or involved small collaborations or resulted in a range of one-off projects that face significant sustainability challenges. And as a result, the National Digital Platform currently exists as a diffuse set of largely disconnected components. At last year's convening in New York, a range of experts, much like yourselves, encouraged IMLS to prioritize improving and better connecting the most promising improving and better connecting the most promising digital tools, services that have the elements that have the most clear potential to scale up. And so a theme that came through that discussion was that there's a clear need to shift away from supporting a range of one-off individual projects to focus more on supporting projects that catalyze action and activity. In that vein, 3 weeks ago, we announced the first 4 awards in this priority area. Elements of those awards, their national scopes, how they build on and leverage existing successful projects and programs, how they respond directly to the challenges of scale, and how they focus on shared capacity and services, responded directly to the issues that were raised at last year's convening. Specifically, a grant to the DPLA, Stanford, and DuraSpace focuses on creating a turnkey instance of the Hydra repository software, which can both help the hubs of DPLA and, more broadly, the range of different users of the Hydra platform. A grant to ArtStore, and 4 partner museums to improve the shared shelf platform to serve as an open content hub for museums. A grant to Old Dominion University to explore scaling up web archiving and using digital storytelling tools to make sense of and provide access to web archives. And a planning grant to Tufts University that will bring together experts from disability services with librarians and IT professionals to explore developing a shared repository for accessible course materials. The challenge to our diverse national community of libraries and librarians is to identify and articulate common goals and priorities for the near term. To that end, today and going forward, we ask the community, what's working well and what needs to move to the next level? What's missing or underdeveloped in our distributed digital infrastructure? What must happen to improve how all of those components fit together and work with other platforms? How do we ensure that librarians across the country are equipped to make the best use of and to contribute to the development of those components to meet the needs of their communities? I'm excited to pose these questions to those convened here today, both in person and via the webcast. We need you to weigh in and articulate what the key near-term priorities should be as a focus across this platform. I'm looking forward to learning together as we continue to iteratively identify how to improve our work. Thank you. And so we can sort of move down the table to begin with. Brett.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Trevor. First, let me just give my kudos to you guys at IMLS. You know, we had a meeting at the New York Public Library that you guys invited me to about a year ago, and we started talking about this idea of a national digital platform. And one of the things on the table was that IMLS was really going to restructure its grant programs to try to meet the requirements of the field. And honestly, you go to a lot of meetings where people talk about doing a lot of changes, but you guys actually did it. And I mean that. I mean, you guys have seriously... I work for the federal government, and sometimes it takes a really, really, really long time to change things. And you guys, within 1 year, made some pretty dramatic changes to your NLG program to try to focus in on this national digital platform. So I applaud you for that. I think that as a funder myself, it's interesting to me, when I look at the list of the people who are in the room, who are attending, a significant portion, probably more than half the people in the room, are people that my agency also works with or funds or et cetera. And that, I think, raises an important point that I wanted to make about funding the National Digital Platform, is that I really urge funders, we need to do a better job working together to ensure that we are developing the National Digital Platform in a unified fashion. I mean, I'll give you an example. In about a week, Mary Flanagan, who will be talking later, is hosting a terrific multi-day workshop on crowdsourcing for libraries and museums and other organizations. And this particular event was co-funded by IMLS and NEH and the Sloan Foundation. The three of us got together and worked it out and came up with what we think is a terrific program that Mary and her team, along with the University of Maryland, are doing next week. But the point is that, honestly, a year or two ago, that probably wouldn't have happened. A year or two ago, IMLS would have funded something to do with crowdsourcing, and then NEH would have funded some completely different event, and the Sloan Foundation would have done some other completely different event. And we would have heard, oh, that's really funny. I heard that you guys did something on crowdsourcing as well, and there wouldn't have been any coordination. I think in order to build this national digital platform, we as funders need to be cognizant of the fact there's a limited amount of dollars out there, and we can't keep funding silos. We need to work with one another and figure out, hey, you know, Trevor, what are you guys funding? What are you up to? What do we need to do? When we get in grant applications, we need to stop funding siloed projects. If someone wants to, if an organization, a library comes to me and wants to fund a project, and it might be a really cool project, and maybe 10 years ago, that would have been enough. But if the project is not trying to take the content that they're developing and make it part of the National Digital Platform, that shouldn't be funded. We really need to be cognizant of that. We need to direct these dollars in a way to have the maximum positive impact for the field, and that is a big change. And it is a lot more work for us funders to talk to one another and do all that kind of stuff. But I can tell you that I'm on the phone with other funders now more and more. I mean, I probably talk to Trevor 2 or 3 times a week, and folks at Mellon and other organizations. So I really think it's critical that we see how OCLC and ALA and AAM and DLF and CLEAR and all these important organizations that are involved in the library field, how can we work together to ensure that we all have kind of a shared vision of the National Digital Platform, and we can all support aspects of it using the mechanisms, the support or grant mechanisms that we have in place already today. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'm going to follow Brett by talking a little bit more about what is happening at the local level with local libraries. The Aspen Institute project, which has been going for 2 years now, has had a very specific focus on public libraries, and because public libraries are so quintessentially local and community-based, we've spent a lot of time looking at how the public library provides a platform for its local community, but in that discussion recognized in an age when networks are really the dominant form of organization, and that's where communities are really built now, that we needed to consider how these networks scale up and connect, because we know that information and knowledge culture flows everywhere beyond boundaries over these networks. So in the work that we've done, we've spent a lot of time looking at how public libraries, talking to public libraries about how they can leverage their 3 critical assets of people, place, and platform. And when we think about that platform and building out the platform for learning and creativity and innovation in the community, you realize in those conversations that there's a grander scale for library cooperation there. That it's in serving the community, you need to be connected into other networks and onto a bigger, broader platform if you're going to provide what your community needs. So I think to that end, we spent a lot of time looking at this question of what is emerging as a national digital platform. I think I've got a quote in our report of Maura saying what she said earlier. We sit atop these 20 years of experiments and work in looking at building the elements of a national digital platform. How do we now bring it all together? I think at the local level, what's really challenging for local librarians and their communities is understanding what is uniquely local and how to then think about participating in something that's national or regional without losing that local identity within the public library. So I think that one of the bigger challenges for public libraries in looking at participation in a national digital platform, even beyond the issues of funding and sustainability, is a sense of cultural identity and navigating what a local library is when it becomes part of a broader national digital platform. Within the work that we've done, some of the opportunities for a national digital platform in particular, and I think Trevor alluded to some of this too, is the opportunity to have people find others across the platform who are working toward common ends, where there's a need for specialization and domain expertise. You're not going to have that in every community. At the local level, in local library, you can provide the level of specialization and domain expertise across any number of disciplines and knowledge sets by participating in a national platform. So I think essentially there's an argument to be made when we've engaged with local librarians. Is a broad spectrum. Some are very excited about the possibility of participating in a national platform and thinking about how they can help connect to and create it. Others are very wary of losing that local control. So I would just give a shout out to thinking about the culture and the kinds of arguments that need to seep down to where the library sees itself at its most local levels. To that end, to what Brett was saying about identifying, I would think of them as allies, whether it's funders, in the case at the local level of community foundations who are in a position to work with local public libraries. There are shared goals and missions that a national digital platform can serve across not just the libraries and cultural institutions and knowledge institutions that we're talking about. And I think that there's an opportunity to pull together a broader coalition, starting in communities, with local public libraries reaching out to some of the other community partners, whether they're in government or community foundations or other organizations. I think in the work that we're doing, what's really pivotal is the state role as a mediator between the local and what's happening at the national level. So I look forward to hearing and seeing more about what that state role is. And then finally, just a real quick plug. I think the FCC gave public libraries a really wonderful opportunity in expanding the E-rate funding as much as they did with their E-rate reform. And there's this wonderful window of opportunity right now for local communities to look at how to tap into that, access that, to build out what they need at the local level and what we need as part of the National Digital Platform. So thanks.
Thank you.
So let me start with my Marxist-Leninist mantra. Ideas have no value unless they are translated into action. Ideas have no value unless they are translated into action. 1 year ago tomorrow, we met as a summit at New York Public Library, and we came up with, I think, 5 basic directions. As Brett and Trevor have noted, how do we move from scattered institutional investments and siloed projects to national programs? And the new investments are taking us in that direction. 2, how do we expand our understanding of digital content at large scale to embrace curation, discovery, use, and preservation of digital content? How do we build tools that are ubiquitous, iterative, transparent, and integrated? How do we build infrastructure at global scale and create public-private partnerships with publishers? Where are they? Media companies, where are they? Search engines and social media to advance our shared digital platform objectives. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, are libraries recruiting, developing, and retaining the diverse professional staff who can lead us in practice and performance. Let me suggest 8 contexts for our discussions today. The global context. How does the national digital platform integrate internationally? We need to give attention to that. The policy context. We are losing the policy wars. We need new policy leadership. We should not allow licensing to displace user-supportive policies. This is a great area of concern, and as IMLS invests in digital content through libraries, we need to be sensitive to those policy priorities. The preservation context. We have a disaster in the making. Published e-materials are not being consistently and routinely preserved. and the waves of born digital content are being lost every second of every day. The diversity context. We need an affirmative action for inclusion of diverse content and diverse perspectives on the national digital platform. We are creating classes of access, communities that have money, communities that have political power, communities that have good lawyers are getting more and better access than poorer communities. And where is the diversity participating in our discussion today? We need to be sensitive to the teaching and learning context and integrate educators into our conversation. We need to be sensitive to the scholarly communication context and integrate researchers into our conversation. We need to set aside the kumbaya of the past, the period of polygamy where we seem to be willing to couple with anyone, anytime, and really focus on more systemic, radical collaboration in terms of how we select and develop partnerships. And lastly, we need to consider the national leadership context. How do things in organizations like ALA and other national associations, OCLC, the Library of Congress, and NARA, what is their role in helping us to define and advance the national digital platform? So I'm hoping we will keep these ideas and these observations in mind as we work over the course of the day.
Thank you. We now have, if I'm reading my schedule right, about 20 minutes of time for comments, questions from the audience that the panel and I can then respond to. The whole concept of the day is that we're hoping to have a significant amount of time for discussion, comment, and conversation after each of the panels. When you do, a reminder again that when you do comment, please make sure you have one of the mics, so just raise your hand and we'll get you a mic, and then say your name and what organization you're here from so that people on the webcast have context as well.
Hi, I'm Lucy Barber. I'm here partly because I'm from the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, which is the grant funding arm of the National Archives. But I did want to call out a little bit that Trevor kept using the word librarian, and there are a few people out in the Twitter sphere and other places that are archivists. And I also think that, and I sorry. And I really appreciated your comment, though, that the platform isn't just, what you see, but all the pieces that make up for it. But I know that I've been contemplating in terms of some of the types of projects that we support over at the commission, and as much as I want to get out of the silo nature of them, they do pose some new challenges. They're different in some ways in terms of how I would ideally like them presented than so far what I've seen possible in terms of what's on like DPLA or something like that, just in the way that electronic records projects sometimes need a more detailed database structure than what an ebook would need. And so that's one of the challenges. We want stuff up there. We want stuff that's accessible, but if we try to simplify things and approach the format if we go for the common and the universal, we might lose the unique and precious of certain styles of data and materials. Like I'm sponsoring the George Washington financial papers right now, and they're doing going to come out as a free digital edition that people are going to download the data from and be able to do analysis of what he bought and how many, how much he spent on different things. Now, that's a very specific type of project. And it's going to be siloed. And I don't know how to solve that yet until we build lots of them together. So that's my, I'm heart torn, but mostly I want you to include archival projects because I already know my boss, David Ferrier, is showing up later and he's contributing lots of material to DPLA and loves to do that. And museums and archives. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if you have thoughts on the material that's hard to fit.
Yeah, I think I would jump in on that. So as Maura had mentioned, libraries, museums, and archives are in our purview, and I think are definitely involved in this. And then I guess my initial comment, and then I'll be happy to hear from the panel as well, on the issue of well, so I think this is why it's important that there isn't one mega system, right? This isn't like the one spot where everything goes, and that there will always be sort of an R&D element to exploring different content types and the best ways to work with those. But at the same time, there's I think a massive power from integrating those and figuring out how to better make things discoverable across these different systems. So in the same way that it's there are going to be siloed projects, but surfacing elements of them or working to have more common ways to work across those is, I think, a great thing to strive for.
I think that archives and archivists are absolutely central to the conversations we're having here. And it's our oversight for not embracing that in our language. And we need to be sensitive to that over the course of the day. I want to sort of reference the digital preservation piece of this, because as you know, more and more of the individual papers and the organizational records and the participation of our world in social media challenges us in very interesting ways in how we're going to preserve and carry forward that content. But we just don't carry forward the content. Obviously, we must carry forward the functionality. And a lot of these projects have very important specialized tools that enable people to probe and ask questions and reach really important conclusions. And so we need to be sensitive to that long-term preservation functionality requirement that we have, as well as the content.
Is it my turn? Do you want to say something, Brett?
I was just to answer Lucy's question one more time. Sorry. I think I agree with you. Obviously, there are some projects that are more boutique-y, but we need to be careful not to get into the trap. I mean, as a grantee, as a grantor, I can tell you, I get tons of applications from people who say that their project is a special snowflake that's different than all other snowflakes. And I think it's important that we not, I mean, the easy way out is to say, oh, you're right, that is special, so you build your silo over there. I think every project should be thinking about how what they do fits in with the community. It doesn't mean that a project should be dumbed down because they're doing something unique or interesting, but there are still ways for them to use national preservation networks, for them to use national discovery networks, even if the project that they're building it has unique data or unique content types. There may be ways for them to work with other organizations at the national level that are doing similar content types. So what I'm getting at is just we don't want to take the easy way out. We really want everyone to be thinking about how what they're doing can be done in a broad fashion and can be plugged into this digital infrastructure in some reasonable fashion.
And Vicki?
Hi, I'm Vicki Reich from Stanford University, and I'm sorry I missed last year's meeting. It sounds like it broke really fabulous new ground, and I wanted to follow up on Jim's plea on the Marxist-Leninist, right, which is just to say that the everything pretty much, aside from the materials that we're digitizing, which often end up on the web, most everything now is up on the web. And I've been doing digital preservation for nearly 20 years and have been collecting it from the web, and it is far too big a job for even the organizations that are represented here in this room. It is just absolutely huge. And so if I had a wish or a plea, it would be for us to work on tools that made it so that we could interoperate among the web tools that are doing ingest and preservation and dissemination and management, and to make those tools not only interoperate, but to make them so easy to use that we can, to be blunt, power to the people. And that's my say.
Yeah, there's an adage that says every snowflake in an avalanche pleads not guilty. And you know, the tsunami of snowflakes, I'm glad that Cliff is laughing. It's clear that we've got this tsunami that institutional solutions are not the right approach. And we don't seem to have the wherewithal to build strategies, not just around web content, and we thank Brewster for his leadership and support in helping us take care of that stuff. But there's so much other things, whether it be the archival materials that are born digital, whether it be the social media, whether it be the research data that my faculty and researchers are producing. It's an extraordinary challenge, and I hope we can give attention to it in our work.
And so we have a question from Brewster, and then we'll have Alan from ALA.
Inspiring. I was trying to just write notes as sort of the summary from my perspective of what was just said. 20 years of experiments, now it's time to bring it all together. Platform, scale, massive power to integrate. If people request funding for digital work that does not feed into the national digital platform, the NEH will not fund it. A word that hasn't been used, but probably would have been used 5 years ago, is synergy. Whenever I hear platform, it's sort of like, oh, I remember that word. It was used by a very famous software company called Microsoft about having its operating system be the platform. So it's a time for consolidation. But what are we consolidating into? We're talking about feeding our materials that have been maintained in a diverse set of organizations, archives, libraries, into a common platform, and consolidating navigation, therefore, and leveraging each other to have basically increased access points. And my being from the tech field, I certainly know the power of winner takes all. And what happens when you have one platform rule them all. The internet, though, has evolved into some other mottos that have been kind of interesting that we might want to take seriously going forward in this. Agile, which means it's not top-down, waterfall. It's all going to be designed, and you get to implement your piece ideas. And the motto of the internet founders was, we believe in rough consensus and running code. That may be different from kind of what I'm hearing so far, and it might be useful. A good test might be to think in your heads at the end of the day, after this program and platform is put in place and funding is coordinated and consolidated, how many independent libraries and archives will there be? What does it mean to be an independent library, archive, or museum in this world, which is increasingly becoming digitals? So I'm not trying to be Luddite here. I think of myself as very much from the tech world, and I love the diversity of the library community. How do we make all of this happen? As one other participant said here, and it's not the person you'd imagine, lots of copies keep stuff open. I think there's going to be issues around public policy, issues around copyright in particular, and if these are gone at in ways that are top-down, I think that we may end up with laws we will regret. So the elephant in the room is the modern materials that are in copyright. And how do we evolve an approach towards dealing with these materials in a way that we end up with something that's not centrally controlled. Thank you.
Does anyone want to respond first to that, or have an initial? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Brewster. I think sometimes in the effort to make progress, we over-consolidate and lose the importance of initiative and innovation. There's a sentence in the book Education of Henry Adams that says order breeds habit while chaos breeds life. And I think we want to make sure that our national digital platform is a reflection of life. And if it means that there's a certain amount of chaos that's built into that, so be it, because it'll be a better place to work and to get things done.
Well, and Amy, I think you had this actually fits very well with some of what you were talking about with local libraries and sort of how the connections there.
Yeah, and the issue, the word that came to my mind after Brewster was speaking was governance, that, you can talk about the platform thinking, you can talk about platform funding, but, once you start doing all that and getting it together, how is it going to be governed? And, we do have a number of, long successful period with the multi-stakeholder approach that has governed the internet and the general consensus and the structure of the governing bodies, none of which seems to have, absolute control over anything. Although perhaps some of the domain name stuff has gotten there. But I think that that as this work moves forward, and as IMLS and its allies move forward with this, that's going to have to be a key part of the conversation.
I think Brewster raises a good point. I mean, with the word platform, it's maybe not the best word in this case. I mean, I don't think of the National Digital Platform as anything monolithic. Rather, maybe a better word would be National Digital Environment or something like that. I think it's about getting individual projects to think about not just themselves, but how they fit into a wider sort of infrastructure, a wider environment, and how their materials can be best shared and preserved in a sort of a national and international scale. It's really, I think, about getting people to think about it from that perspective rather than just building individually. And I think that certainly at the NEH, I think we come from a tradition, for example, of funding like books, monographs, where I think that most individual authors tend to think about, well, I'm just worried about my book, because the library infrastructure that makes that book shareable is something that was outside their control, But I think that when you're building a digital project today, you do need to think about how it's going to interoperate with the rest of the world and ensure that it gets out there. And I think that's really at its heart what this platform is about, is thinking about it beyond just the scope of your individual project.
Well, and I'd add on that too, just that it's not just about sort of shared ways of doing access, but I think Archivit is a great example of a tool that enables libraries to collect and to sort of carry out that element of their mission and then to share those collections. So I think this is still very much sort of trying to build common tools that support all of the institutions in their missions to collect, to provide access, to provide services. And so the more that we can fit those pieces together, but right, not in a sort of monolithic sense. And Alan, you had a question or a comment?
Sure, thank you. Alan Eno, ALA. First, I just want to thank IMLS for the National Digital Platform. Speaking from a policy advocate's point of view, it's kind of from a national point of view, what do you advocate for? And so this is an important construct for the whole community. So first of all, it's incumbent upon all of us to support it. And so what can we do? One is to create momentum. So you can blog about it, you can write articles about it, talk about it in your presentations at conferences and so on, right? So that there is this kind of increasing legitimacy from the field that this is a real thing and it's really important to us, and therefore it should be supported, and in particular by Congress. As Morris mentioned, it's in President Obama's FY 2016 budget. And so we need to create that support that this is actually important for libraries, for archives, and for the whole country. And just want to point out that next week is actually National Library Legislative Day, and so there's an opportunity to help demonstrate that support, that that this is really important, and that it's a really good hook for us that we have something specific that we can advocate for. So I just want to thank IMLS for taking that initiative during the past year. The other comment is something Brewster mentioned about copyright. And I just wanted to mention that this morning there's a new important coalition on copyright that was just launched called Recreate, and includes some of the major players in Washington, such as the Consumer Electronics Association and Electronic Frontier Foundation and Public Knowledge, and also ALA and the Association of Research Libraries are founding members. There are 10 founding members. And so it's going in the direction of user rights and what the general public needs in terms of managing and using digital content. And so it's a step in that direction, but obviously there's a lot more to be done. Thanks.
Thank you. If there are any reactions, or we have a hand in the back for a microphone too, and then we're just about at time, so we'll take the. Okay, no, we've got two question comments.
It's not a direct comment. I didn't know if someone else actually had another. Okay. I just wanted to point out, hi, my name's Kara Van Malsen. I'm from AV Preserve. We are a consulting firm, so we get to work with a lot of different organizations, very diverse organizations. And while I very much applaud breaking down the silos, I think this is extremely important. It's what we do in most of our work, but we're focusing on silos internally at organizations. And I think we have to keep in mind that most of these organizations that we're talking about potentially funding really exist as many, many, many silos within those organizations. If we can't break those down, how are we going to, break down these regional and national silos? I think we need to not overlook that need, because my concern is that what we end up doing is taking slivers and pieces of each institution that's participating, and they get to join in, while the rest kind of get left behind. So if leadership at libraries and museums and archives are only focused on, we need to get with the IMLS National Digital Platform, and oh my gosh, we're never going to get funding any other way, are they going to be leaving behind parts of their organization which are struggling? Are they going to be not focusing on creating enterprises that really manage their data as these organizations can, increasingly become managers of large-scale data sets? So I don't know if there's a role for IMLS or NEH or other funders to play in that, but I think we need to not lose sight of that.
Thank you. And we'll take the other comment in the back, and then we'll have a moment or two for.
Hi, I'm Kim Kristen Withy from Washington State University, and the Mookadoo Project Director, funded by both IMLS and NEH, so thank you. I know we're focusing on the platform and the digital. I also want to focus on the national part and remind us that we do have 566 federally recognized tribes within nations within the nation. And we've brought up copyright, we brought up content, and some of that content we need to pay attention to that is in the public domain or copyright by third-party owners is historically owned by other people. And so some of the time, so I just want to bring the conversation also local communities. We can focus on how do we serve tribal archives, libraries, and museums as sovereign nations also funneling their content in, but having different concerns. How might we be aware of those? And I appreciate Trevor and Brett making sure that we understand that the platform's not monolithic. So that's just more comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. So we are we're at or a moment over time. So I wanted to thank everyone on the panel for participating and everyone so already in the conversation. And we'll have a moment to switch out, but I think we move straight into our next panel. So Tom Scheinfeld, if you can come up, you're the host, and then